Asa, you have a segment for us with new details about how Israel killed Israelis on the 7th of October. You wrote about this in your new piece, Israel's National Murder-Suicide Pact. So our viewers and listeners can go read more details on that if you go to the story. And the story includes links to all the sources for everything you're about to see. So Asa, let's dive in. Tell us about these new revelations you've uncovered and written about.
Thanks, Nora. Do you remember this video?
Thomas waited 2 agonizing days before getting the news.
They just said, "We found Emily. She's dead." And I went, "Yes!" I went, "Yes," and smiled. Because that is the best news of the possibilities that I knew. That was the best possibility that I was hoping for. She was either dead or in Gaza. And if you know anything about what they do to people in Gaza, that is worse than death. That is worse than death. The way they treat you. They'd have no food, they'd have no water. She'd be in a dark room filled with Christ knows how many people, and terrified every minute, hour, day, and possible years to come. So death was a blessing, an absolute blessing.
I do remember that.
That man was, of course, and is, of course, Thomas Hand, an Irish-Israeli settler. Now, believe it or not, he was talking there to CNN about his reaction when he was told by Israeli occupation authorities that his daughter, Emily Hand, had been killed on the 7th of October.
And like many people say, he's not exactly going to win Father of the Year award anytime soon.
For sure. I mean, I can see people saying that again in the chat. Thankfully, as we know, it turned out that Emily was alive and she was in Palestinian captivity in Gaza, and she was released unharmed as part of the prisoner exchange deal during the short-lived truce that took place in November.
So what have we heard from Thomas Hand since then?
Well, quite a lot. He's practically been on an Israeli government world tour by now, despite what an unsympathetic person he seems to be. Last week, the Israeli Foreign Ministry even tweeted this tweet you can see on screen here, an attack on the Irish government after they announced that they were recognizing Palestine as a state. This decision will reward the monsters who kidnapped Emily, they claimed.
Unbelievable. Yet she seems to have been treated humanely during her time in Gaza, despite what her father envisioned.
Absolutely. Hand's macabre statement that death for his daughter would have been a blessing compared to being held prisoner by Palestinians was, of course, complete nonsense. Hand's attitude towards his own daughter only seemed to get worse after she was released. And we discovered an Israeli TV interview with Thomas and Emily from February. Apart from a few exchanges in Hebrew with Emily, the interview was mostly conducted in English, and we're going to play a clip from that now.
Believe it or not, in my head, at the time when she was captive, I knew that the IDF had to do everything in its powers to destroy Hamas, primarily, and to do whatever they could to find and retrieve the hostages. And within that thought process, I realized that she could be bombed, could be shot by friendly fire. That was a price that, in my head, I could say, yeah, okay. So long as we destroy Hamas, so long as the government and the military finish the job they've started out to do. If not, everyone who's died, hostages, all the massacres, all the terrible things that happen is pointless. Pointless. A waste of time, effort, and lives. We have to finish the job completely. And I really don't care what the world says. I really don't care. Doesn't matter what I say, they'll think whatever they want.
He said this about his own daughter right in front of her. And she obviously looks uncomfortable. And you have to wonder if she's going to want a relationship with him when she's older and can kind of fully grasp the psychological brutality here.
Well, indeed. And the surprising thing was, from what I found in my research, that Thomas Hand is far from the only Israeli with such a weird attitude. And many Israelis seem to accept the fact that other Israeli civilians, soldiers and civilians, and sometimes even including themselves, will end up being killed by their own military, not by Palestinians, by their own military as part of the price to pay for wiping out the indigenous people in Gaza.
Of course. And this is called the Hannibal Directive.
Right. As our regular viewers and listeners since the 7th of October will know, Israel's got a military doctrine called the Hannibal Directive, which, when enacted, allows them to kill their own people in order to prevent them from being captured alive by Palestinian or Lebanese or other Arab resistance fighters. I won't repeat all our past coverage in depth right now, but while I give you the short version, Tamara will put on screen some of the many articles and videos that we've done on this, which you can go back and look at after the stream. So on the 7th of October, Israel scrambled multiple fighter jets, drones, and Apache helicopters within minutes of the start of the Palestinian assault. And there was video released by the Israeli military itself on this. And we posted a copy showing this happening in real time. And we posted a copy of it in November. This is the video here and the article that we did about it in November. Now, YouTube censors have actually added an age restriction to that video. So we're not going to play it right now to hopefully avoid that sort of soft censorship, if you will, happening again. But as long as you've got a 18 plus YouTube account, you can go and watch this video after the stream, and you can see that this distinctive green sort of heat footage. And what it shows is multiple civilian vehicles and groups of walkers of uncertain identity being shot and bombed. And lots of these videos were also collected in the Al Jazeera documentary called October 7, which was released in March. Now, according to Israeli media sources, quote, in the first 4 hours from the start of the battles on 7th of October, helicopters and fighter craft attacked about 300 targets, most in Israeli territory, end of quote. Now, according to an Israeli Apache helicopter pilot, more than one pilot actually, who was interviewed in the Hebrew language press, they were instructed to, quote, shoot at everything they see in the area of defense, end of quote. The pilot was quite clear in that quote that this fire was indiscriminate. So it would have included Israeli captives themselves. And we have many testimonies confirming that that did indeed happen.
Exactly. And they also sent tanks to flatten homes inside the kibbutzim, especially in Kibbutz Be'eri.
Right, absolutely. We don't have time to go through the whole assault, but this video you can see playing right now is an Israeli Air Force video footage from their own craft of Kibbutz Be'eri, and you can make out there the tanks firing on homes circled in red in this video. Now, we estimate that hundreds of the 1,150 or so Israelis and foreign nationals who were killed during the 7th of October assault were actually killed by Israeli forces themselves. And now, that's a topic for another day, but the point for right now is that the mainstream Israeli media sources have confirmed that on the 7th of October, Israel reactivated the Hannibal Directive and then used it against Israeli civilians who had been captured by Palestinian fighters who would otherwise have been forcibly taken back to Gaza. And we translated a long Hebrew piece from the new Israeli newspaper Yediot Ahronot, detailing all of that by the Israeli journalists Ronan Bergman and Yoav Zitun, and we translated it in full. Despite, it was a very long piece, but we translated it into English in January, and it still hasn't appeared in an official translation. I mean, ours is the only full professional translation that I know of into English, done by our friend and colleague Dina Shunra, despite the fact that this newspaper regularly translates most of its articles into English, and despite the fact that its primary author, Ronan Bergman, is also a high-profile New York Times journalist. He was a lot more frank in this long piece than he is in the New York Times. Now, according to another article by his co-author, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜, who, like Bergman, is extremely close to Israel's military establishment, there was an immense and complex number of what they called friendly fire incidents that took place on the 7th of October. And I covered that in that previous piece that Tamara showed a bit earlier. Yeah, this one here on screen now. And again, this is not the words of Electronic Intifada. This is the words of pro-military Israeli military correspondents, right? And there was another Israeli Air Force colonel who called the 7th of October a mass Hannibal event.
Right. And this policy of shooting at everything that moves has not stopped, right? I mean, right now, Israel is shooting and bombing everything and everyone in Gaza, including even captured Israelis who they're ostensibly in Gaza to recapture and get back.
Absolutely, yes. It's thought that as many as 70 of the captured Israelis in Gaza have been killed by Israeli fire. And that's what Thomas Ham was talking about when he said in this interview, this TV interview, when he said, yeah, okay, to the idea of his daughter being shot or bombed. I mean, I still can't believe that he said it, like literally holding her hand, you know. Is unbelievable. But this is what he was talking about. The Israeli public know that the Israeli, the so-called hostages, the prisoners of war, are being, slowly killed by Israeli bombardment. This is what he was talking about when he said, yeah, okay, as long as we destroy Hamas.
Asa, you mentioned that there were others examples of this Israeli phenomenon.
Yes, but first of all, I'll just say that the following examples I'm about to go through are not the attitude of all Israelis. There are many Israelis, clamoring for a prisoner exchange, and some are holding regular protests, like you can see in this footage, that are calling for the government to make a deal with the Palestinian resistance.
Right, but it's important to point out that they're doing so for their own reasons. They're not calling for Palestinian prisoners to be released on principle, and most of these protesters probably support some sort of military action, even if some do want a ceasefire now so that their loved ones can be released. There's not a lot of talk in these protests about ending the settler colonial project of Zionism and living in full equality with the indigenous Palestinians, of course.
No, not at all. I mean, there are a few Israelis who take that view, but they're a handful of people. I mean, what
literally
you said is
a handful.
What you've said is absolutely right there. But I just wanted to put that disclaimer on what we're about to see as a factual point, because some of it is pretty shocking, and I don't want to overgeneralize. So the first example is one that actually Tamara found and drew to my attention, and it's this video we're about to see, which was shot and produced by the New York Times. Now, in kibbutz near Oz, which is a colonial settlement on the frontier with Gaza, a mother called Natalie Yohanan told the New York Times of her family's experience barricading themselves in their bomb shelter for 12 hours as Palestinian fighters arrived in their home on the 7th of October. So here's what she told the Times.
They were in my house eating. They watched TV, they watched a show on Netflix. They knew we were inside. And for 12 hours, we sat and waited for them to get in and kill us all. The kids were so quiet. They were so afraid. They were whispering, "Mom, I'm afraid. Mom, I'm hungry. Mom, what are the bad guys doing here? Why do they want to kill us?" And I told my husband, if you can't hold on anymore, I told him, take your weapon and shoot us in the head. Make it quick.
Make it quick. That's her words. Kill us all rather than being captured. That seemed to be the message there. The second example from a bomb shelter, one man called Or Yelin, who is the son of a prominent local politician and Argentinian settler, Chaim Yelin, Or was guiding journalists around Kibbutz Be'eri in the aftermath of the 7th of October assault. And he told I-24 News that he was preparing to actually stab his own wife to death that day rather than let Palestinian fighters capture her. Here's the clip.
Told me, oh, if they coming for us, you have just a kitchen knife. Please kill me before. And you know what I will say to her? Yes, because I know what they aim to what they aim to do. To torture, maybe they will rape her, and after it, they will tear her apart and then kill her. This is the reality.
The third example is even more shocking, if that's possible. A woman called Shani Goren, who was a resident of Kibbutz Nir Oz, was captured by Palestinians on the 7th of October. Now, she and her group of Israelis were being forcibly taken to Gaza. While that was happening, she was attacked by an Israeli attack helicopter who fired on them all, captors and captives alike. And you can read more about that in David Sheen and Ali Abu Nama's article from March, which you can see the headline there. An excellent and really comprehensive article there. And now what happened was all of the Palestinians were killed. Miraculously, only one of the Israelis was killed, but several were injured, including the 2-year-old child, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿. Now, here's what the survivor, Shani Goren, told Israel's Channel 12 back in February, and it's a lot. So run the clip, please, tomorrow.
הייתי אומרת לו תודה, ולמה לא נשארת? גם למה איפה לא היית שפה, להוריד את כל מי שכאן? סוג אחד היה יורה, הכל היה בסדר. לא היינו בכלל מגיעים לעזה.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, for those listening who don't know Hebrew, what was said there was the interviewer asked Goren what she would say to the attack helicopter pilot who fired on her if she could meet him. Her reply was, quote, "Thank you, and why didn't you stay? Also, why weren't you there? Why weren't you here to take down everyone here? If one helicopter had fired, everything would be okay. We would never have gotten to Gaza," end of quote. So, like, to emphasize, she's saying take down everyone. She wanted everyone to be taken down, implicitly including herself and the two children. So not only did she approve of the death by helicopter gunship fire of the woman who did in fact die, an older woman called 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿, but even seems that she was willing for the whole group to die, again, including herself and 2 children, as long as it meant stopping captives being taken to Gaza.
I mean, it's so shocking to hear, this very like open death wish against people like her and the other clips that we saw, and their children. And what is behind all this, Asa? What, like, how can we understand this?
Yeah, it's a big question. Well, in one word, colonialism. Settler colonial fantasies about the uniquely evil nature of the natives. Now, notice in those example clips, implicit in what they're saying is the belief that being held prisoner by Palestinians is the worst possible thing that could ever happen to them. They are, in essence, claiming that the uncivilized Palestinians would murder, torture, or rape them. They're claiming that imprisonment by Palestinians is literally a fate worse than death. And some of them even said as much explicitly. Remember what Or claimed was that Palestinians would have abused and killed his wife. The quote was, "Maybe they will rape her, and after that they will tear her apart and kill her. This is the reality." But that was far from the reality of how Palestinians have actually treated Israeli prisoners. This is a sort of depraved fantasy version. And Thomas Hand also described Emily's captors as barbarians, if you watched the whole interview. But the Israeli captives seem overall to have been well treated by their Palestinian captors. And most of the surviving civilians were actually released during the brief November truce. Almost all of the remaining captives are soldiers, including some high-level officers, reportedly. Now, as regular viewers and listeners will also know, Israel's claims about mass rape have been totally debunked. not least by this live stream. And there's still no evidence of rape of Israelis taking place on the 7th of October. And not one single alleged victim has been named, either alive or dead. All of this despite 8 months of lurid Israeli fantasies about natives raping their women.
Exactly. And it seems like some Israelis would literally rather die and have their children die than allow Palestinians to live.
Yes, and the sad thing is that this indoctrination into this sort of murder-suicide cult starts from a young age. Many Israeli school children visit this archaeological site, Masada. Right. It's a Roman fortress, and it is supposedly the venue of a last stand of a Jewish sect called the Sicarii in 43 AD. In 73 AD, and the story goes that the fighters killed their own families and themselves rather than be captured alive by the Romans. But actually, all of that is a myth, and despite his best efforts, excavations in the 1960s by the war criminal Israeli general and archaeologist Yigal Yadin found no evidence of mass suicide, and certainly not a mass grave. Even most Israeli archaeologists no longer accept the myth that Yadin created, and some even say there was no siege at all. But even if it had been a true story, it would have in no way justified Israel's murder-suicide rampage.
Right. Yeah, Masada is pretty famous, and many Israelis, Jews, and Christian Zionists from all over the world are taken there on visits and sort of as like a preliminary indoctrination into this cult. There's a motto that goes, "Masada shall not fall again." I remember seeing T-shirts in Jerusalem with that printed on it. It is part of this indoctrination.
Yeah, for sure. And there was a recent essay in the Israeli newspaper Haaretz by the Israeli literature professor Yoav Rinon on the screen here, and he put it like this, quote, "Contemporary Israeli identity is rotten. In other words, the myth of Masada, along with the myth of Samson, means that the murder-suicide pact is deeply ingrained into the Israeli collective psyche. And Samson, of course, in the Bible story, carried out a kind of primitive suicide attack against the inhabitants of an entire building in Gaza."
Well, all of this might help explain why some Israelis seem so keen to be Hannibaled by their own people.
Yeah, and remember that Hannibal was a Carthaginian general who fought the Romans, and he also killed himself rather than be taken alive by his enemies.
So back to Thomas Hand, has he ever expressed any contrition or apology for saying he was gleeful to hear of his daughter's death?
No, he hasn't. But in a recent interview with Piers Morgan, he did clarify that he had never wished for her death. So let's play that clip.
Just correct you there. I never ever hoped that she was dead. But when I was told that she was dead, I was relieved that she wasn't going through all this suffering that the rest of them.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's an important clarification. I'm sorry. Yeah, you're right.
So, yeah, there's that for the record. Finally, there was one quote from the Masada myth that really stuck out to me when I was researching this. And the Roman Jewish historian Josephus described two long speeches alleged speeches by the Sicarii leader Eliezer ben Yair shortly before he killed himself and his family, according to the story. Now, modern historians say that it's practically certain that Josephus invented those speeches, and it seems pretty obvious when you read Josephus with modern eyes. For instance, the speeches are ostensibly verbatim, and how would a Roman historian miles away have any way of recording such a speech? In any case, this particular part of Josephus seems to have influenced some modern-day Israelis, whether directly or otherwise. And this is what the Sicarii leader is supposed to have said: "Let our wives die before they are abused, and our children before they have tasted of slavery." And that sentiment, if you add that sentiment to your common or garden form of 19th century racist settler colonialism, you get Zionism in Israel, a modern day murder-suicide pact.
Asa, thank you so much for detailing this for us. It's always important to put the horrors and atrocities that we're seeing on a day-to-day basis into kind of a broader context of ideology and what Zionism has always been and is now. So people can go to your piece at the Electronic Intifada for more details and the full-length video clips that we presented some of here. Again, the story is titled Israel's National Murder-Suicide Pact. Asa, thanks again.
Thanks, Nora. Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit like, leave a comment. These engagements help us with the YouTube algorithm, and it helps us to get around Silicon Valley censorship as much as possible. It does make a difference. You can also support our journalism by going to electronicintifada.net and clicking on donate now. Thank you.